and somebody who else set you up?
Roger.
Roger.
He's not here.
Not here, but anyway, pass it on, thanks. For setting up the room for us, and for Don for setting up the camera and the video equipment. And it's gratifying to see so many of you. I think it says something about our investment in the world on which we live and the ways in which our environment is changing. We don't need any proof other than watching our television or reading our newspapers to see every day the number of places in the world that are being affected by climate change. And it's also affecting a lot of animals, and including our favorite entrepreneur. So it's my privilege and pleasure to introduce my daughter. Our daughter. As you will quickly discover, she is a very passionate and concerned person about many issues in our world, including the climate. She has a master's degree in adult ed and has a business called Wings to Fly, and specializes in customized information centers, information sessions, and training for businesses, small and large, about communications and staff training and that sort of thing. And she does a little bit of personal coaching as well. She also spent a while down in Pittsburgh with Al Gore recently, and has been doing some of the presentations as part of the outcome of that training that she took with Al Gore. You remember he won the Nobel Prize for the Inconvenient Truth. And she will be telling us that we must do something about climate change. We can do something about climate change, and we will. So I think we've heard enough from me, and you'll have a chance to answer some questions if you would like to as we go. And we're grateful that you're here.
Thank you so much. It's genuinely a pleasure to be here, and I've met some of you over the years, with Mom and Dad attending here, but it's nice to see so many faces here tonight. We weren't sure how many to expect, so this is a nice surprise to see all the chairs full. And I want to thank you for coming tonight, because it is a really important conversation, and it's one that not everybody wants to be having. So I appreciate the fact that you have decided to spend your Wednesday night here with me and each other, and having some conversations that we need to have, and talking about what we can do about this situation, because it can feel a little bit overwhelming sometimes. Do we want the lights off, or that, at least for now, while it's not too dark outside? Is that better? Yeah. So this guy's at the therapist's office, and he says, I'm just so worried about mercury in the water and sulfur dioxide in the air. And the therapist says, groundless fears, not worth your time. It's the dead zones in the ocean caused by algae and the carbon particles in the air, which should be terrifying, And it can feel like that, right? Like everywhere you go, there's this sense of, there's more bad news about the environment. And so it can feel overwhelming. There are actually support groups now for climate anxiety and depression, which is a thing now. So yeah, if you're interested, you can Google that. There's resources online. It's a thing, because this is a big deal. So I want to ask you to start tonight by just turning to the person you're seated next to. If you came with that person, maybe turn to the other person. Find somebody you didn't come with. And I just want you to answer this very simple question. What was it that prompted you to come tonight? Why is this important enough to spend your Wednesday night with me? So you'll have 1 minute per person. So after 60 seconds, I'll go, guys, wonderful. And then the other person gets to say why they're here. Any questions? So person A, you got 60 seconds to answer what prompted you to come tonight. And then I'll have you switch. Go.
Oh, I had to run the camera. guess we got sound, and she needs this wildlife. You can't see her. It just does black glare. So like black silhouette. We can't. It's all white. We should have had a we can't turn just one bank on. It's all on or nothing. It's unfortunate. Like I thought she was going to be standing closer to the screen, which doesn't make any difference. Right now, it's what even if she were in front of the screen, we wouldn't see her unless she was covering part of it.
Okay, switch roles. So you've been listening, now you're talking. Go.
We don't blood.
I don't like you, so I'm leaving. Join our side. No, they're trying to videotape this, and apparently I'm in the dark. Is this any better or no?
No, a little bit, but not much.
You're standing over here.
That's good.
Do you turn one of them on?
I don't know. Let's Jim.
Yeah, we can turn the lights on just
Tell your husband to hit one of the bank of lights and see what happens. I think it's either all or nothing, but I'm not sure. Yeah. Okay, let's go with that, and I can
It's not bad.
I can zoom.
You can always turn them off if you're doing dark
Oh,
spot.
you're so kind. Hey, later.
Yeah, that's better.
All right, so, I mean, other than the stepkids who are here, who had to be here, for the rest of you, what was your answer to the question? Why are you here tonight? Just popcorn, just some of the things that came out of your conversations. There's no popcorn. I should have made popcorn. Popcorn style. How about that? Popcorn style. So,
And answer some of our questions that we're thinking of.
okay, and what kind of questions are they?
What can we do to change things?
What can we do to change
I'm just one person, I mean, if I act myself to another person, we can do something.
Right, so I'm just one person, what can I do? But maybe if I join with another person, we could do something. Good. What else?
Learning more about
To
it.
learn more about it, right? We hear these snippets, we know there's something, well, good.
We start with straws.
We're starting with straws, yes, yes. Big anti-straw movement happening this year, for sure. What about this side of the room? Anything that
We
came
know
up?
that every year temperature has been increasing on
Yes.
the earth. Why?
Right? Yeah, it's getting hotter in here.
Yes.
Crazy all over the world.
Anything over here?
I try to do as much as I can, as I was telling them, in my own small way.
Right.
I do vermicomposting, I do outdoor composting, I separate all my garbage beyond recognition. I do all of those things, and yet I still feel as if I'm not even making a drop in the bucket.
Right.
So I'm hoping that tonight I can find something else that I can do to make an impact.
Right. So what can I do? I'm already separating my recycling. What else can I do? Yeah, and
I was just going to say that, like, some of us are from this middle generation that buys and throws, and, you know, we're more wasteful than our parents, although, like my dad saves every little bit of something so that he can make something with it.
yeah.
So there's that effect as well, but, you know, we're very, spend a lot and waste a lot.
You can buy us all a Tesla.
I can buy you all a Tesla. I wish I could buy you all a Tesla. I wish I could buy me a Tesla. Yeah, so I mean, I'm assuming that many of you had similar answers, right? Yeah.
I have a concern about the amount of plastics, throwaway plastics that are entering the environment.
Absolutely, right? We see these atrocious pictures of the garbage patch floating around in the ocean. And
But just in our own streets and sidewalks and ditches. And
I see.
whatnot.
So just even when you're up for a stroll, you see it everywhere. Yeah, which is so disturbing, right? Like, it means that somebody just literally threw that as they walked along.
Yeah.
Like, what is that? Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, it comes down to usually two things mainly, right? One is, I'm concerned about this, I've heard about this, I want some more information, and the other is, what can I do? Right? I want to leave here knowing what I can do about this. So the good news is we're going to talk about both of those things. I'm not going to say all the depressing information and then just bye-bye, you know, good luck with that. But we do have to also talk about some of that too. And so I want to share with you a little bit about why I've made this choice to be here. This is my mom and dad. You might recognize them, maybe not. And that's me. Can you see the resemblance? And so I grew up the daughter of 2 ministers with the Salvation Army, and they got 3 weeks holidays every year. And so we spent our summers in Northern Ontario. Anybody been to Northern Ontario? Right? It's gorgeous up there. And so that's where my love of nature and my sense of spirituality about nature really, I think, was born, is in Northern Ontario. And this is my family in Northern Ontario a couple of years ago. So that's my brother and his wife and 2 girls and mom and dad and myself. And there's Rob and the kids a few years ago. Barely recognize them now. And the reality is that those 4 kids, when they're my age, their world is going to look very different than it does right now. And so that's my motivation. And my dad said, I'm very passionate about this. And it's true. I mean, I want those kids to know when I'm gone that I did everything I could do to leave them a planet that was livable, right? So that's my motivation. That's why I went down to Pittsburgh, why I spent 3 days with Al Gore, which was an absolutely amazing experience, as you might imagine. A great, great mentor and a great, great man. Because this is how it can feel, right? Watching the news and the weather comes on, the weather report. It used to be, oh, it's going to rain tomorrow. And now it's, tonight's weather report contains some alarming material, viewer discretion advised, right? And it's pretty scary when you know, the most terrifying thing you watch on TV is the weather, right? Yeah, it's pretty scary. So that's why, what motivates me, that's why I'm here. This picture, how many of you are familiar with this? Most published picture in history. It's called The Blue Marble. It was taken in 1972 from the NASA Apollo mission. And it was the first time that humanity had that sense of, oh, we're all in this together. Like, we're all hanging in space in that blue dot together, and there's no lines dividing those countries up. And so there's that sense of awe and mystery and the sense that we're all in this together. And at the same time, it's really hard to wrap our heads around that stuff, right? Because our brains, in some ways, are still Stone Age brains. And that's part of our reality. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about that, just to sort of set the stage for tonight. Tell me if any of these ring true or ever have rung true for you in your life. Someday I'm going to start eating better. I've got to start saving for retirement soon. I can stay up late tonight, and then I'll just catch up on my sleep on the weekend. Young people are all like, I should try meditation sometime. I hear it's supposed to be really good for you. Or gotta get going on my taxes. Or someday soon I'm going to start going to the gym. I'm going to start exercising. So anybody ever had a thought along any of those? All of them? Anybody? All of them? And you've just proved one of the points that I'm making, and that is that our brains are not wired to deal with long-term, large, slow-moving problems, right? Our brains are wired to deal with immediate alerts and threats, right? Because our ancestors, those who saw the snake and jumped back or ran from the lion, were the ones who survived to pass on those genes, right? The ones who thought, oh, it's probably fine, you know, are the ones who didn't make it, right? So our brains are wired to not really notice or do stuff about things that aren't immediate, right? We have brain shortcuts, or heuristics is the word they use. Solutions to problems that are personal. This affects me right now. abrupt changes in our environment. And that can be as simple as, it's really cold in here, right? 1 or 2 degrees below what we're comfortable, and what are we doing? Right? Going over to the thermostat and turning it up because it's chilly by even a couple of degrees. Something immoral or indecent and stuff that's happening now. That's the kind of stuff that we're wired to pay attention to and to work on solutions for. What do you see? Bam! Right? Yeah, it is a washing machine. I don't know if you can see this. I'm going to turn off the light for just this time. Yeah, I don't really got the effect. What about that? Or that? Da, da, da. Our brains are wired to, see patterns where sometimes there really aren't any, and to see threats, right? That's what we're wired for. And so there are biases that we have that I'm going to suggest you may need to work against this evening as I go through the material. One is optimism bias. In other words, bad stuff happens to other people, not to me, right? Like, and we all have a little bit of that, like, traffic accidents, and that's really awful. It's never gonna happen to me, though, right? Confirmation bias. What's confirmation bias?
When you agree with something that somebody else is doing and it makes you feel good.
Well, yes, so you already agree with that information. You want to add anything?
So you have an idea and you find one little piece of information that supports your idea and you ignore like the 25 other things that don't.
That's it, yeah. So we already have what we think is true and right, and our brain literally filters out the information that's coming in that doesn't match what we already think. So if we already think, it's probably a hoax, which if you do, you're probably not coming to this tonight, then you are going to filter out any information that does not support that. It's just part of our shortcuts in our brain. Our social group frameworks. So again, when we were evolving, if you were outside of your group, it was pretty much a certain death situation, right? We're still working with that brain to some degree, and so if your friends and your family all are saying one thing and believing one thing, and you start to think, I don't know if that's right, it can put you outside of that social group, and our brains are not comfortable with that. So our brains will work to avoid you doing that, right? You have to really be strong to sort of separate yourself out from that. It's true. Yeah. Oh, you said it's true. Oh, thank you. I'm going to pay you twice. Cognitive dissonance. Anybody know what that's about? Are you a psych major? We have to pay you too. This is bad.
So it's when you know something is bad, but you do it anyways, but the back of your brain is yelling at you like, stop doing this, but you can't do it. It's like smoking. Everyone knows that it's bad, and like you never want anyone else to do it. Like you're still addicted to it.
Because it's sort of like it doesn't fit our perceptions of ourselves. Yeah, it's sort of like this is. So for instance, if you have been saying all along, it's probably not a problem, and then you start letting that information in that could be a problem, this can work against you too, because your brain can be saying, well, that would mean we've been wrong about this all along, and that can't be because we're never wrong, right? And so your brain will work against that in that way too, so it doesn't fit your perception of yourself to be wrong about something so big. Yeah. All right, 2 more. A finite pool of worry. Right? The reality is that somebody who's trying to figure out how to feed their family does not have a lot of time left over to worry about climate change, often. Sometimes they do. But often, if we are being pulled in all kinds of other areas, we're worried about that diagnosis that we just got or somebody in our family just got, our pool of worry is centered around that kind of stuff, and it doesn't leave much left over sometimes. And that's just part of the reality of this issue. And finally, we know that it's kind of scary information, and our brains are wired so that if there's something we fear, we avoid it and we go in the opposite direction. Makes sense, right? All of this stuff makes sense. And it's just part of what you'll need to keep in mind as I go through the material. I had to work against some of these things when I was receiving the information as well. I think, generally speaking, I've known for a long time that this was a problem. But I don't know about you guys, but I've sort of had this idea that somebody else is going to take care of it. I don't know if anybody else felt like, I'm sure somebody's working on this, right? Like, somebody's got to figure this out. Not going to be me. but it's a problem. We should probably do something. And I too, you know, bringing my recycling, you know, separating my recycling, bringing my shopping bags to the store and all that kind of stuff, and feeling like I'm really doing it. And it wasn't until I took the training with Al Gore that I was so sort of overwhelmed with the information of the reality. His organization is called Climate Reality for a reason. So I had to fight against these things too. So your job is to have that in mind as I go through this material. And my job is to give you the information and then help you sort out what are you going to do with that, where are we going to go from here. Any questions? Okay, let's jump in, because we have lots to talk about. So as Dad said, there are those 3 questions, and we're starting with, must we change? Like, is this really a big deal? What's the real situation? Is it being made out to be worse than it is? All that kind of stuff. So let's just talk about that for a minute. Many of you, how many of you are very clear about the science behind this, of why the Earth is warming? Because I find usually that half the crowd is kind of like, I think I know. And I want to say to you, Dad did not mention this, but I happen not to be a scientist. I'm not a climate scientist or scientist of any kind. So I come to you as a fellow citizen who's gone and done the training, and my job is to now go out and do these presentations. And the idea is, he calls it chains of inspiration. So I'm sharing the information with you, and then you go out and share it with your friends and family, and on we go. So, having said that, here's the basics of the science of this. So, solar radiation's coming in, going through the atmosphere, warming the planet. Most of this is absorbed by the Earth and warms it. It's very nice for us. And some of that energy is radiated. Can you see that okay? It's like little red lines going up there. Some of that is radiated back out into the atmosphere, and it gets through the atmosphere and out into space, which is great because it keeps our planet at a really good, they call it the Goldilocks planet, right? It's just right, not too hot, not too cold. And some of that outgoing radiation is trapped by the atmosphere, and it keeps us just right in that nice temperature. So what's the problem? What's happening here?
Our ozone layer.
Well, the ozone, we've kind of patched that up a lot, but that was a big problem.
Carbon dioxide's getting too much, too many particles, and it's keeping more heat in.
Yeah.
So our blanket is becoming like a triple duvet.
Yes. Did you all hear that?
No.
So too many carbon dioxide particles are being trapped, and I'm going to talk about why, in our atmosphere. And it's like, you use the word blanket, that's exactly the word I use. It's like putting a nice warm blanket on our planet. The problem is, a nice warm blanket is making it really hot. We're trapping extra gases in the atmosphere, and that's locking that infrared heat in. It's keeping it in instead of letting it go back up. That's basically what's happening. This is a picture of our atmosphere. And I don't know if you've ever sort of lain on the grass and looked up at the blue sky or floated in the water, and it just looks like it goes on forever, right? It's beautiful. However, the reality is, it does not. And to give you the sense of this, I brought along a prop thanks to Jordan. This is his basketball. So if you think of the basketball as like planet Earth, our atmosphere is akin to the width of a piece of saran wrap. That's it. That's all that's protecting us from the cold of deep space and the burning up of the sun. This thin little layer. So no wonder it's easy to crack a hole in it, right? No wonder it's easy to affect it, because it's much, much thinner and much more fragile than it looks to be when you're staring at it from down here. Does that make sense? Thin. Okay, so the problem is that we're taking that thin little membrane and we're dumping 110 million tons of global warming pollution into that atmosphere every 24 hours. To give you a sense of what that means, it's like setting off 400,000 atomic bombs every single day. Not every year, or every 10, every day, 400. So this. Sorry. energy, so 400,000 of those every 24 hours, 365 days a year. That's what we're adding to the natural CO2 levels in the atmosphere. No wonder we're having some problems, right? And there are many reasons for this, and we won't get into all of the reasons tonight in great detail, but I would say go online and check some of this out. But we're heating things up, so the permafrost is thawing and letting methane gases that have been frozen for a long time out. Transportation, of course, is a big one. We all know that. We're burning and slicing and dicing up our forests. We've lost much of the forest cover in our planet, which was really helping to keep the carbon dioxide at a good level for us. And animal agriculture is a big one that nobody wants to talk about, but we need to talk about how our food choices are impacting the planet. The reality is that animal agriculture is harder on the planet in terms of global warming gases than all of the planes and trains and buses, all transportation combined. So we've got to take a look at that as an issue, but nobody wants to talk about Thanksgiving dinner when they're talking about this, right? But it is something we're going to have to look at. However, the largest source continues to be the burning of fossil fuels. You can see from Second World War onward, there's a big spike there, and that coincides with the average temperature rising. So we're putting that pollution up there, it's trapping the heat and keeping it down and warming up the planet. So that's the basics. 2017, 40th consecutive year with the global temperature above the 20th century average. This is a little demonstration. So it starts in 1880. The yellow and orange, of course, is showing it heating up. We're in 1960s now, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2016. Right, it's pretty shocking when you see that all together. So the jury is really not out on climate change. Any reasonable scientist who does any work in this area, who's not being paid by the oil and gas industries, is all saying the same thing. All around the world, they are all in agreement. This is not in question anymore. So let's just talk about that for a minute. So some of the things that are resulting from this situation, one is the actual heat itself. Like just the heat that we are bearing is a problem for us humans. We're not meant to handle these kind of temperatures that we've been seeing. So the next section, I'm just going to be talking about some of the impacts that this has had in terms of the environmental calamities that we are seeing. So I'm going to run through some of them fairly quickly. So don't worry if you don't get every single word on every slide. I'm going through the overall picture here. So this is Washington Airport, and you can't really see that, but the tires are melted into the tarmac there. This is Australia last year, record high, 117 degrees. 117, right? Like when it gets up to 90, we're, Kuwait City, 124 degrees. The birds were literally dying in flight and falling out of the sky because of the heat they were experiencing. This guy is melting into the road in Turkey last year in July. India, all-time records, almost 124 degrees. And our bodies are just not meant to take this stuff. So we had 2,300 people died in the 2015 heat wave in India. Pakistan, 129 degrees. 129 degrees. And so 1,200 people died. And one of the points that I want to make is that it's not the wealthy who are dying, right? It's the people who are poor, who have no access to air conditioning and have nowhere to go. And the reality is that in general on the planet, the people who have contributed the most to this problem, mainly Western society, we stand to suffer the least from the consequences. And those who stand to suffer the most, the poor, the people living in rural countries on the seaside, fishermen, those are the folks who tend to suffer the most in terms of the consequences. So it's a real sort of justice issue on one level for those of us who use that kind of language in the church atmosphere. Okay, so, yes, so back to this story. So 1,200 people in Pakistan. Our bodies just aren't made to handle that kind of heat. And what they're saying is that this is going to become the norm. Like, it's not going to be, ooh, that's an extreme temperature. It's going to be like, yeah, that's yesterday, right? And so we've got to figure that out, how we're going to manage that kind of heat. What about Ontario? This is what the temperature trend looks like here from 1948 to 2008. Clear warming trend through Ontario. Second thing, storms. We've all been following Florence, right? And this is something I learned last fall when I was with Al Gore, that the storms that we're experiencing, it's not our imagination. They are becoming bigger and stronger and more destructive, and it's because of climate change. And I didn't know the connection. Does anybody know the connection between those two things? I didn't.
The difference between the hot and cold is what, isn't that what turns it up? And
Yes, yes. And you want to add? Do you want to add? Or is that the same thing you were going to say?
It's the amount of water that's being put into the atmosphere, and it's falling on land where people live.
Yeah. Yeah, so essentially, when storms are going over the waters approaching land, when they are stirring up the ocean waters, if that ocean water is cold, it dissipates the energy in the hurricane, right? What's happening now is it's passing over warmer waters. When Hurricane Harvey went over, it went over waters that were 7 degrees hotter than normal. So this shows you, this is the global ocean heat content rising from 1950 to 2015. Clear trend, right? Why is that? Turns out that the oceans are actually soaking up 90% of the excess heat that we are putting up in the atmosphere. The oceans are soaking it up, 90% of it. So really, if they weren't doing that, we'd be in a much worse situation right now. They've been soaking up a lot of the heat. The problem is that that's causing all kinds of problems in the oceans, right? Ocean acidification, the barrier reefs are dying. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. And so when Harvey made its path last year through here, it went over, as I say, waters that were 7 degrees hotter than normal. And so it was, instead of churning up cold water, it was churning up warm water, which was adding extra precipitation. And so we see these huge downfalls of water. 33 trillion gallons, right? And to me, that doesn't really mean, like, I don't know what a gallon is, right? Like, it doesn't really mean anything to me. But think of it this way. It's equal to the flow of Niagara Falls for 509 days, right? Here's another video, so be careful if it's loud. So imagine that, for almost a year and a half of that fell on Houston in 3 days. It's just unprecedented, right? And it seems like each storm that comes along, each event that comes along, we hear these kinds of unprecedented, 1,000-year storm, but we're having them every year, right? Hurricane Florence, many of you will have seen this picture, right? It was so big they had to use a wide-angle lens from the space station to capture it all in one photo, what I understand.
It was actually going to the ocean floor.
Is that right?
And sucking up stuff.
Right from the ocean floor. I had
Yeah.
not heard that.
That was.
It was massive.
I read where it went from Montreal to Louisiana.
Massive.
And the eye was as big as the whole of Toronto.
The
Like
eye
whole-
of the storm.
Just there, yeah.
This is the biggest Toronto. Right? I mean, this is
You can't imagine
unprecedented.
that, eh?
Yeah. So we have this storm this year that, now it dissipated as it went to shore, thank goodness. However, it was a bit deceiving because the problem with hurricanes in terms of destruction is not usually the wind. I mean, that doesn't help, but it's actually the water. It's the storm surge and the rain that falls that's really the problem with hurricanes and the damage they do. And so we've been seeing some of those images coming in. This is from Florence. Back to Houston, this was in Texas last year, and I leave this in because it makes the point that not only the poor, but the elderly tend to be disproportionately affected by these kinds of events. These folks were trapped in those waist-high waters for hours before they were rescued. Yeah. And the reality is that we're likely to see many more Harveys and Florences in our future. And it's all around the world. So the same week that this was happening in Houston last year, India was dealing with flooding. 1,400 people were killed in India. We didn't hear much about that, of course, because we were dealing with our stuff, right? Irma followed it. Category 5 hurricane for 3 days. Never happened before. Right? And in fact, one of the scientists that was at the presentation with Al Gore said that they're actually talking about they may need to look at the categories they have, because we're seeing stuff that they had never anticipated before. So they need to actually change the categories when it comes to how we understand hurricanes, because we've never seen this before. Yeah, that's called a rain bomb.
Isn't it something?
Isn't it? You can just see it splashing down on the city below. It's crazy weather events. There's India. There's the other
Dios. Madre mía.
crazy. What about us? Toronto, this is 2013. We were underwater. That's us. TTC West there. There's Highway 27 in Vermonthorpe. $850 million in property damage. And who's paying for that, do you suppose? Right? The insurance companies are passing that right along to us. And a few months later we had the ice storm. Massive events. Okay, so then we move to drought, and people say, well, how can the same problem be causing massive flooding and drought at the same time? That doesn't make sense. It's actually the same phenomenon that's causing both. The same heat that's taking water out of the ocean and causing these big downpours is taking heat out of the land as well and causing droughts. And again, I'm going to go through these fairly quickly. It's just to make the point that it's all around the world that we're seeing this. So this is Brazil. This is a river in Italy. This is all from 2017. This is Spain, France, South Korea. 11% of what it should have been. This is China, worst drought on record. India, worst drought in 140 years. Cape Town, South Africa, worst water shortage in 113 years. And many of you will have heard about that last year, right? They were counting down to day 0 when their city was out of water.
Yeah.
You all hear about that? This is my sister-in-law and her husband and their 2 kids from a few years ago. They live in Cape Town, and so that was really personal in our family, because she was one of the ones who was going to be out of water, and she was talking about all the things that they were doing. They got a very little amount each per day, and that was it. And once that was gone, right? And some of the conflicts that were already starting to happen over water in that situation, and that's the kind of thing that we are looking ahead to. You've heard this probably. There will be wars fought over water in the future, and we're already starting to see some of that. It was before and after as they prepped for day 0. I'm happy to tell you that they have had lots of rain, and so the reservoirs are back up. So they have dodged that bullet this time. This was us a couple of years ago. That's Aurelia. The red there is Aurelia. Here we are in Toronto. So some record dry temperatures for us as well, which of course affects crops and the amount of food, and so food scarcity is also an issue. Unsurprising, hotter years have more fires, right? So yet another issue. And of course there's a clear connection between the two. So here we are at Fort McMurray. That's us, right? 100,000 people evacuated, the whole city. 2017 was the worst fire season on record for BC. 1,300 fires. 2018 is on track to at least be the second, if not to beat their record. And this was from this year. We heard about the air pollution and people couldn't see the skies because the fires are burning so badly. And of course it affects animals too. I think about all those animals who live in those forests who suffered horrible deaths
I was just realizing that also means a lot less trees, which was one of your items that kept the earth cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're cutting down the forests and the rest of them are being burnt down. Yeah, it's a double whammy. And again, I'll just quickly fly through these. This is around the world. That's California last year. Here's Washington. These guys are golfing. They don't seem too concerned. This raging fire in the background. In France. This is Portugal on fire. 35 people died there. So these extreme weather catastrophes are on the rise. This is 1980 on the left and 2017 on the right. So, no question that we have a problem, right? Mother Nature is screaming at us. A couple more points and then we'll move into what we can do about this. The sea level rise, to me, this is the one that people most associate with climate change, right? There's all this, oh, the seas are, and they are. They already are. And it's only going to get worse. This is a glacier in Greenland in 1935, and now it's a lake. Right? The ice sheets. Whoops. What did I do? Glacier, lake. And NASA has been really closely monitoring the amount of ice mass in Greenland, and it's a very clear downward trend. This is not new information, but of course as that ice melts, it means the waters rise, and thermal expansion, so as water heats up, it gets bigger, so the water itself is growing, if you will, which is also accelerating the sea level rise.
Ice sheets rest on the ocean floor and can melt from both above and below sea level.
We have warm waters that are near those ice sheets. And if those warm waters actually touch the marine ice sheets melt, and you have big changes in sea level.
As the marine ice sheets melt, the land-based ice behind them moves more quickly toward the sea, and this poses the greatest threat for rapid sea level rise.
So that's just sort of a quick little video to sort of help explain some of what's happening there. This is Miami Beach, Florida, and this was on a sunny day. It hadn't had rain for days. This is just high tide now, a lot of the time. That's Al Gore, actually. Sloshing through, so that's just kind of normal now. It's become their new normal. And when we look at the cities at risk from sea level rise in 2070, we have Miami here, and this is in terms of assets, so the money to be lost. Right? So take a look there. This is the same information, but in terms of population at risk. And the main point of those two slides is that we've got huge and relatively poor populations that are going to be affected by sea level rise. What does that mean for the rest of us? Yeah. We already have a refugee crisis around war and starvation and famine and all those kinds, and that's not going very well, I would say, in the world right now. People are shutting their doors, right? We don't want them. This is going to be of a scale we've never seen. When we talk about climate refugees, where are these millions of people going to go? Where are they going to go? The Department of Defense for the US has been talking about this for a while. Back in 2014, they said climate change is likely to lead to food and water shortages, pandemic disease, disputes over refugees, and natural disasters in regions around the globe. So the Department of Defense is already sort of on this. A little cartoon, it's a bit fuzzy, but you can see today the consequences of war, tomorrow the consequences of climate change. A medical emergency. Did you know that? It's also, are you depressed yet? I promise there's only like a couple more. But it's fascinating information, right? Who knew? I didn't know it was a medical emergency, but it's things like tropical diseases are on the move, right? We're seeing things like Zika virus in the US. What? Right? Why? Because the warmer temperatures are allowing insects like that to go to places they haven't been able to go before. What is it affecting us in Ontario? Yeah, so West Nile and Lyme disease, right? The black-legged tick that we're all dealing with. How many of you know somebody who's either been bitten by a tick or had to take the medication for Lyme disease? Or has Lyme disease, right? More than half this room, I would say almost 75% of this room. If I asked you that 10 or 15 years ago, how many of you
wouldn't know what it was?
You'd be like, what's Lyme disease, right? Yeah. So it's just another sign of what is happening here, and it's all related to this same issue. Aren't they gross? Gross. But it's not their fault, right? They're just doing their thing. This breaks my heart because, you know, all the stuff I've been talking about, almost all of it, we caused the problem, and we're experiencing the negative effects of this. What breaks my heart even more is that we're taking down all kinds of species with us, right? It's not just us, and we don't have the right to do that, in my opinion. So we risk losing up to 50% of all land-based species in this century. We've already seen them moving poleward at 15 feet a day, both plant and animal species, because they can't handle the heat, right? So they're trying to get to, and of course then they get to places where they don't have the food they need. And so we're seeing rapid species extinction as part of this. We've already lost more than half the animals on our planet in the last 40 years. The oceans are not doing very much better. Almost 50% on average, depending on species, from 1970. It was 2 years before I was born to 2012. Half the species, half the vertebrates. This is 2014. This is a reef, coral reef, and this is it dying in February of the next year, and that's it dead by August of that year. Interesting. I've never seen that before. And the bleaching event in the Great Barrier Reef from 2015 to 2017 is the worst they've ever seen. For us, we're looking at things like losing our barn owls. And of course, what would a presentation on climate change be without a polar bear, right? The house of polar bear. And finally, this is the agricultural piece I was talking about. So 70% of our agricultural land use is for feeding cows and pigs, animals. Right? 30% of the Earth's land surface right now. 30% of the Earth's land surface is going to feed cows. It's just it's such an inefficient way for us to feed ourselves. And 14 to 18% of greenhouse gas emissions are coming from that. Does anybody know why? Part of what the big thing is with cows? Farting. Embarrassing. Yeah. They're farting.
Yes.
They're farting methane. Right? That's a bit of a problem. But yeah. And it's using up water, the water resources that go into producing, you know, for instance, a kilogram of grain versus a kilogram of beef. No comparison, right? Water, the land. So again, it is something that we've got to look at. So the cost is high. And much, much more. And they've actually said this is the #1 threat to the global economy. So those of you, or those whom you know, who are saying, well, you know, the money, I mean, the amount of damage, the money that we're going to spend trying to fix this problem and deal with the repercussions of this problem is astronomical. This is insurance prices rising from catastrophic losses in Canada. This is in $1 billion. So in the last number of years, it's been over $1 billion each year that the insurance companies have been paying out in Canada. By 2050, the government of Canada has said that climate change will cost us up to $43 billion a year. By 2050. That's not that far away. I don't know where we're going to find $43 billion a year. So, do we have to change? No, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. Is anybody else warm in here?
Yeah.
Can we open the door? Or maybe open the windows. I was like, is it just me, or is it like I'm talking about climate change? So I'm getting really warm. It's like I'm living it right now. Yeah, and I don't want you to like not off on me. So yeah, we got to make some changes. Can we change? The answer is yes. Again, I refer you to think about what was it that prompted you to come tonight. What is it that motivates you to make some changes for the future of this planet and all of the species on it. For me, it is a spiritual issue, and I don't include this slide in all presentations, but it seemed relevant to this one. These are 2 quotes from the Bible. I love this one. Ask the animals, and they will teach you. Or the birds of the air, and they will tell you. Or speak to the earth, and it will teach you. Or let the fish of the sea inform you. Right? Mother Nature is screaming at us. Right? We have to listen. We have to listen. And I love this too. God put Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden to serve it. Right? Not to dominate it. To serve it, to guard it, and to protect it. Amen. Can I get an amen? I didn't know you guys did that here. It's very Salvation Army of it. And this I love. This is from an indigenous perspective. You've heard my voice a lot. Somebody else read this out. Who's got a good loud voice? You're laughing. You can read. Do you want to read it? No. I will. Okay, good.
The web of life. Teach your children what we have taught our children, that the earth is our mother. Whatever befalls the earth, befalls the sons and daughters of the earth. If people spit upon the ground, they spit upon themselves. This we know. The earth does not belong to us, we belong to the earth. This we know. All things are connected like the blood that unites one family. All things are connected. Whatever befalls the earth, befalls the sons and daughters of the earth. We did not weave the web of life. We are merely a strand in it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves.
Isn't that beautiful? The wisdom of our First Nations people. So it is for me. It's a matter of our heart, our spirit. Our spiritual sense of who we are in the world, and are we here to dominate, or are we actually just one part of a complex web that we don't understand, but we've been kind of trampling on? Right? And so, for me, part of it is shifting how we see ourselves in this web. We're not the pinnacle of creation, which I think many of us were kind of taught, right? Like, we're the top, and then the animals are for us, right? And the plants are for us. And I think that's had some repercussions, unfortunately. And so we have to sort of shift how we see that. We have the solutions at hand. So I'm just going to cover a couple of these things, and I'm going to get you guys to talk amongst yourselves. Because things have changed, right? Computers then, massive whole room, and a computer now that fits in your hand, right? When it comes to energy, then, energy now, it's the same, right? We haven't done much to change. But the solutions are here, it just takes political will. So, the projection around wind capacity, they said maybe 30 gigawatts by 2010. We pushed past that by 16 times that amount. Here's 1980 to 2016, capacity worldwide. And can you see that? It's just shooting up. Should we turn off the lights? It's hard. It's a little blue line, but it goes up. Woo! Like that. And why? Partly because the cost is coming down at a precipitous rate, which is fabulous. Just a couple of little facts. For the entire month of June last year, 100% of Scotland's electricity came from wind. Right? 100% for a whole month. It can be done. Yep. In England, they got more electricity from wind than from coal in 2016. We're moving in the right direction. What about Canada? What does it look like? Whew, right? 2000 to 2014, installed wind power in Canada. And who's leading the way? Ontario and Quebec. Woo! We're the winners. Yeah, and Alberta. Yeah.
But that's changed.
Well, it's changing all the time.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it is changing all the time. This is a tower factory in Stevensville, Ontario. So, it's employing people, these industries. So people tell you, oh, we're going to lose all the jobs. How many of you have heard that? Or said it?
Oh, you say it all the time.
Right?
Every time there's an innovation. What about the jobs?
Yeah. However, when you think back to things like
The horse and buggy.
the horse and buggy, right? They said the same thing. Oh, all the jobs. We made the transition somehow. Right? We'll do it again. There's more people working in our green energy sector, in Canada and then in the oil sands. We're employers. What about solar? The energy market, we thought 1 gigawatt by 2010. We did 17 times past that. Whoops, did I go too quickly? Oh well. World solar installations. Again, this dramatic shooting up, right? What about Canada? Whoop, same thing. Canadian investment, 2.8 billion in 2014. It's awesome. We have the world's 3rd largest solar panel manufacturer right here in Canada. Canadian solar. And why? Again, partly because the cost is coming down precipitously. And you know, at some level, some of this is economics, right? Like we got to make it cheaper for people and easier for people to do this, to move this direction. And this is part of what I love about this, right? Ta-da! Yeah, so places around the world where they don't have the infrastructure and the wires and all that, they can have electricity. Stick a solar panel, right? Here we go again. This is in Bangladesh. And you see pictures of students working, you know, attached to a laptop with a solar panel that's fueling it, sitting like outside in farmland, working on their laptops. Because we have solar power now. It's awesome. China is all over this. India, they both are going to more than meet their Paris agreements, which is fabulous. This is a great success story in Chile. So this is 2013, 2014, 2015, and now. I'll be back. I just gotta go. Right? Amazing, amazing. It's happening all over the world. It's exciting. The reality is that we get enough power from the sun every hour to fill the entire Earth's need for a year just from the sun. Every hour. Right? We just need to capture it and figure out how to save it and then use it. It's awesome. In the US, solar is growing by 17 times faster than the rest of the economy, so don't let anybody tell you that it's a problem in terms of jobs. Solar installer, fastest growing job category in the US. Wind turbine service technician is the 2nd fastest growing technology, job. General Motors is all over this. Electric vehicles are on the rise, of course. These are all the auto manufacturers that are moving towards electric vehicles. Yeah, all the biggies. So, can we change? We have solutions. They're there. So why are we not doing this?
It's politics, and it's who we elect, and money.
Yeah. Yeah, there are a lot of things that could be done, and
that 1% still has power.
Yeah. Yeah, so I want to give you a chance to have some conversations about this. This question about will we change? We will. It's a question of whether we'll do it fast enough. In 2015, almost every nation in the world agreed to sign on. Now, there is a nation that is pulling out of that.
Yeah.
Right? However, I'll let you in on something Al Gore told us at the conference with a bit of a wink.
He's running for president.
Well, no, I wish. Did you hear what she said? He's running for president. No, I don't think he'll ever do that again. No, but he said that the first time that they can actually legally withdraw from the Paris Agreement is the day after the next federal election in the U.S. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. The climate marches. Al Gore was like, I'm right here. That's me. So proud of himself. This is us in Toronto. 10,000 people marched in the streets of Toronto. We're the first province to set pollution reduction targets. We're closing the coal plants. We're doing some great things. Vancouver is going to be 100% green in the next 20 years. Wow. Right? Wow. It's awesome. Transform TO is a project that we're working on in Toronto. So this is a very human story, right? There's like devastation and terrible, and then there's like excitement and possibility, right? So we want to be on that side of the coin. So what can you do? Here's the question. How are we for time? Excellent. Okay. Because we don't want to be terrified by these guys, right? We want to see them for what they are and move through the fears of taking action. So I'm going to show you a quick little video in a moment that's going to talk about 4 levels of action that you can take. I just saw it this week and I thought it was really worth sharing with you, so I've added it to the presentation. I will share with you, this is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change from the United Nations, and they have shared their top 4 biggest things you can do from the United Nations perspective. Are you ready? Don't have an extra kid. None of you are having an extra kid. Right? Don't even think about it. Well, yeah, the 2 in the back. Yeah. Here. Yeah. Live car free in the suburbs, right? Like that's a bit of a trick. Yeah, downtown Toronto, no problem with that. Avoid 1 round trip transatlantic flight. I don't know about you, but I haven't gone in any of those. However, this one is much more within our reach. Yeah, eating a plant-based diet. Although for some of you, that may feel like as impossible as this one. So we'll talk a bit about that, but there are lots of resources to help you shift in that direction. And actually 2 of them are sitting in the back row. Jim, see that? Yeah, you're gonna kill me. Oh yes, that's right, forgot. You have a 3rd resource right over here. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so do you need to just stand up and let the blood flow to your toes for a second? Why don't you do that? Does anybody else Who's a good athletic person in the brain?
I mean, you're doing a good job.
How are we doing so far? Still with me?
Your family is very
I got you for another 29 minutes.
good genes and good diet.
All right, so have a seat. Have a seat. Oh, you just get started. Lead on and How am I doing? Did you used to be like an aerobics instructor? You went to fall prevention. She went to fall prevention today, and she's. I bet they didn't say do calisthenics in your class to prevent falls. Although keeping your musculature is good.
Balance.
I didn't miss a thing.
Well, we all did little calisthenics.
Yeah. Oh, you missed the calisthenics. You can do yours while I watch.
I already worked out twice.
All right. So this gentleman works with an organization that I've just been getting to know in the last couple of months called Drawdown. Anybody familiar with this? Paul Hawken is his name. I have the book here. You can take a look at it at the end. The most comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming. And so essentially, this guy worked with scientists all around the world for several years with the idea of putting together what are the top 100 solutions that will actually draw the carbon out of the atmosphere. So his whole thing is, it's not about like, ooh, mitigating. His whole thing is we can reverse global warming. If we just did these things, we would reverse. And it's all very sort of scientifically assessed and categorized. So he's got like it all in order from 1 to 100 of what's the best solution down to the least solution. So this guy works with him, and he talks about 4 levels of engagement or involvement. So there we go.
In terms of a lot of social change, and especially in relation to the environment, I think of what I call the 4 levels of action. The first is individual action. The second is action with my friends and family, the folks I'm directly connected to. The third is community and local institutions. And the fourth is the economy and policy change and changing laws. And so, in the environment, level 1 is, yeah, I recycle, I use less, I drive less. Level 2 is I get me and my family to do that. And maybe I put solar panels on my roof. And maybe I join a community-supported agriculture, a CSA. Level 3 is that's when I start to do things like change the way that the schools that I'm connected to. right? The way that I change my workplace, that maybe I organize in my town, right, to start moving towards a community solar array, or that I start to, I go into the industries that I work in and I make changes. And the idea for level 3 for me is a place where it's at the level of institution and groups, but where I'm still known as a person, and so the other model that I give for level 3 is, if I can get in touch with a person who's in charge within about a week and get a meeting, that's what I would consider to be about level 3. Like with some work, I can get a brief meeting with a mayor of my town, right? And then level 4 is, like I say, policy. It's change the law. It's write your congressperson. It's boycott this product. And the environmental movement, I think, in a lot of ways, has given the message that's been at level 1 and level 4, right? Change individual actions, or sign this petition, lobby this person, right? And the thing is, I think our greatest impact is actually at level 2 and level 3, and especially level 3. And the reason that I say that is, if I change a local institution or something that I'm involved in, I'm not just impacting my life, I'm impacting the lives of hundreds or maybe thousands of people. I'm also changing an institution, and then other institutions can take a look at that and take the model for that change. So an example is, like say I get the local school to put solar panels on their roofs. I can actually get that done. That's a project that I can see through beginning to end in a year or two. And I can talk to all the people who are involved in it, and I can figure out the economics of that, like how much would it save and how much would it work and what would the cost be. I can organize and create a coalition to get it done, and I can do this part-time. I don't have to do this full-time. But the conversation that I have, that I get to generate at the school, is a big piece of the change, right? That the conversation with the principals and with the students and with the PTA is as useful as the change itself. And we're getting into this idea of, oh, we could do something about this. And then when the solar panels go up, then that means all of the other schools in the neighborhood or in my city have to go, why don't we have solar panels? I mean, this school did it. And so that's a level of change that I think that we ought to be focusing on. Because, and I think specifically with drawdown, like there's these 100 solutions that are named in drawdown. And the question is, how are they going to be implemented? But one of the things that the project did is they looked at projects that were happening at what I've heard Paul Hawkins call from the middle out. Not just from the grassroots up, not just from the top down, but from most of those changes were organized by people working at level 3. That it was farms figuring out how to change their farms and change their relationship to the market. It was, solar panels started very much at the municipal level. And so, doing environmental regeneration and afforestation, like there are large-scale national policies that do that, but a lot of it is local folks in the community who have a connection to a particular piece of land that has said, let's replant this forest or let's regenerate this river, right? And so the implementation of drawdown in a lot of ways is going to be at level 3. And that's where the momentum gets changed, because then it creates models for change and the sense that people see the possibilities of doing it. It's also a level at which a lot of people can participate. And we do not have to wait for anyone. We don't have to wait for Congress. We don't have to wait for a company like Kmart, or Walmart to change what they're doing. We don't have to do that, right? We can change it at the level of the institution, and that's where I think the momentum is going to be implemented. So to get back to that question of I drove here, and that sense of it, it's, should I figure out ways to use public transportation and to not drive? Yes. And I do that also because that's my level 1, and because I'm trying to teach myself to get used to the new society that I think we're going to have to move into. And it's also, so that I walk my talk. Those are all really important pieces. And do I get my family and friends to do the same thing? Yes. But working with teenagers taught me something really important. When I was working with them on environmental questions, and we were re-examining the whole thing, they said, if it's not fun, don't talk to us. They're like, if something for the environment isn't something as an opportunity to socialize, then you're already done. And I was like, that's brilliant. So first of all, that was this phenomenal lesson to me about working with teens. And then the second piece, though, was, right, I should be doing the same thing. What is up with all this grim, self-hating, blah, blah, blah? It's like, no. It's like, hey, let's all go to the farmer's market together. So I try to go to the farmer's market with my friend. Let's carpool together. Let's be on BART together. It's like that level 2 element of making it social. I was sort of like, oh, it's this great pointing towards doing this as community because it's more fun and enjoyable to do that. And then when I do that, then we can really do level 3, and that's where the change comes. And level 4 is also important. Sign the petitions, write the congressperson, donate to Greenpeace, like do all of those things. But do it in this kind of whole system of, I think, for me, is the way that we integrate all of these changes, and that I can know that I'm really doing something, and not do it from a place of guilt, but do it from a place of, I'm going to change something. I'm going to change the largest thing that I can change, that I can actually touch. In terms of this idea of kind of the level 2, level 3 change, another thing that I think about is, I think that the framing that a lot of folks think about in relationship to making change is that becoming an environmental activist. Right? And so they have to be standing out on a corner with a clipboard saying, do you have a minute to talk about the environment? Or they have to be lobbying all the time. Or they have to leave their job, gain a new profession, and go towards that. But I think it's actually in the opposite direction. I think people can and should and need to stay in exactly the realms where they are. Because the truth is, we're going to have to change everything. Like everything about it. What we eat, how we produce power, the clothes we wear, all of this. And every profession has a role to change. Every neighborhood is a place that can make the change. And so I think it's powerful for people to realize that the where they live and how they live and where they work is exactly the place where they can make the change.
Isn't that beautiful? So inspiring. Yeah, and also positive, right? Like, who wants to have fun when you do stuff like this? I do. I'll share with you, I won't tell you the whole story of how this all happened, but I ended up being the candidate in Oshawa for the Green Party, just a paper candidate, and so I spent this past weekend in Barrie at the convention. And one of the things they talked about as to why they think Mike won his seat in Guelph was because they were having fun. And they talked a lot about that it became like the headquarters became like party central. And there was just food all the time, and people would come and just kind of hang out because it was fun, right? Who does that? Like, who does that at a political campaign? I don't know. But I thought, ooh, I want to be part of that, right? So important to have fun with this as well. So what I want you to do now is just for about 10 minutes, 5-10 minutes, I want you to get together in little groups, maybe like 4 or 5 people in a group. So you can move your chairs around and just make yourselves comfortable. I'll open the door and let some air in. And I want you to just have a quick conversation with each other about this stuff. And so you can pick which category you want. If you feel really strongly about this one, that's fine. Or you can sort of stay where he was talking mostly about community. I would invite you to think, I mean, you're already a community, right? You're already a community here. So what could you be doing together here, in this building, for instance, or in this community, for instance, right? I think those could be really powerful conversations. And also, if you have suggestions individually, that often comes up where people are saying, well, I'm doing this, and nobody's ever heard of that before. So if you have something to share with your little group, now's your chance. So any questions? So you're just having a quick conversation. Probably about 7 minutes is all we have time for, unfortunately, but I can leave that with you as homework as well. But I want to give you a chance to start those conversations. So you've got about 7 minutes, just in groups of maybe 4 or 5 people, no more, because otherwise people don't talk if there's more than like 5 people in there. So try and arrange yourselves that way and just like move the chairs around, and then I'll call you back in about 7 minutes. Any questions? All right, have a good conversation. Mostly, I'm interested to hear just a couple of comments that came out of your conversations. Where did the conversation go? What did you guys talk about that you would maybe want to share with the rest of your teammates? Yes.
We did discuss more plant-based.
Okay.
Diets.
I wasn't on the group.
You did too? Did anybody else talk about that?
Plant.
Wow.
I can do that.
We're praising Harvey's for They're veggie burgers.
You're praising hard for the
A&W.
A&W.
But have you seen their garbage disposal bins with one that says compost or recyclable and one that says not?
No.
It's one bag.
Oh.
I looked.
That's a complex issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You have to sort of weigh out all the pros and cons and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, so plant-based diet sounds like something that was in several groups, which is awesome. And there's so many resources. One sitting right there, two back there. So maybe that's something you guys will start. It's like a vegetarian potluck once a month or something, right? Start like in, yeah, it's fun, right?
We could do that.
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah, everybody make something and bring your recipe with you, and then you all exchange recipes and all that kind of stuff, right? And it's fun.
I think if we talked about advertising environmental, well, we found out that our property committee is doing environmental actions that we didn't know we were doing. So I think, and from some conversations, we think that maybe we'd like to be involved in setting an example for the community, or starting perhaps an environmental section on the board. And it can start slowly with just presenting awareness to the congregation, and then
what we're already doing. Because we didn't know that they were already doing that. So advertise, and then people will take it home with them, and maybe they'll repeat it in their own home.
So can you guys all hear at the back?
No.
I know they're facing me. No? So basically, they discovered that the church is already doing a bunch of stuff that they didn't even know you were doing, right? So one is just advertising that or letting people know, so they're raising awareness about the fact that it's a problem, and here's what we're doing. That's exciting because it gives people something to join into. Like you said, something like, I could be part of that, right? So that's sort of what came out of that.
Well, there's a start. You're here.
I'm here. Oh, I can know everyone.
You're here, but it does come to you.
Right?
So
I mean,
that's
the room
start,
is full.
It's harder to come and talk. And
it's awesome. It's
I
awesome.
think that's a start, isn't it?
It totally is a
They
start.
just kind of think of things.
Yeah.
All these people.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's lots that
Through the church.
could be offered. Yeah, programs that you could
Programs.
run. Absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
think that was fantastic.
There you go. I'm going to have to pay you a lot of money.
That is a start. And they discovered that the church is doing other things too that they didn't realize was happening.
So give us two of the things that you did not know that were happening that they're doing. Give me two. LED lights, okay?
Trail's all built with natural reused material. The trail is all built with reused natural materials, like which donated material, donated building materials. It's all used.
So you have a trail, first of all, that's awesome. And then it's all built with recycled materials.
We could even advertise the trail. Well, we should have an environmental committee. That was.
You need an environmental committee.
That's why not one of these. So I was thinking that we should need a representative on the board, an environmental representative on our board of directors.
Getting goosebumps.
What's this trail?
So the suggestion here is we need an environmental committee in this church. And the second thing was we need someone from that committee to have a representative on the board. What do you think of that? That was my mom. All right, that's awesome. Anything from you three, I think. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, they use all China cups here, they don't use styrofoam.
Brilliant.
That's true. No disposable dishes are allowed here.
Brilliant. You know what I saw this week? I really like this. So if do you have a dishwasher here? I'm sure you do. Yeah. Way more environmentally friendly to use a dishwasher than it is to wash by hand. Yes. By far. Yeah.
Good.
Right? Dishwasher! Yay! I was very happy.
Yeah. Hands wash his dishes, right? Hands still have to dry them.
The hands still have to dry them. Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, you save a lot of water because it reuses the water in the machine. So yes, so thank you for that.
Oh yeah.
What about you three? Did you want to add?
We pretty much focused on vegetarian
Did you
diet,
really?
yes.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was a concern of ours when we seen the cattle. That was a major
Those
concern.
feedlots,
They're awful.
oh, they
Yes.
are,
Yeah.
yeah.
I don't
Just
know
for
if
those
any of you
guys to
saw
go
this,
back.
but Florence, one of the outcomes, 1 point, I don't know about the hogs, I don't have the
I
number of
think
the
it was
hogs.
400,000.
Was it really?
I don't know.
Millions of
1.7 million chickens drowned.
Oh, dear.
Now, I mean, part of that is there were 1.7 million chickens.
Yeah.
But when you start looking into that stuff, it's shocking. Like, we kill billions of gentle, innocent, sweet creatures every year. Yeah, and the conditions they're kept in are, if you knew, you would not stand for it.
I was gonna go home and have a roast beef sandwich when I got home. Now I'm going home to have a lettuce sandwich.
Put a tomato.
We'll let you throw in a few chickens there.
Cows are so happy! I was just gonna say, you don't have to have a lettuce sandwich. I promise there's way better food.
That was my supper.
Can you?
Perfect.
Oh.
That was his supper.
What is it?
What is it?
Broccoli and kale slaw with radishes and all that, made with a little bit of avocado mayo and olive oil. And then I had a roasted acorn squash, which was had a little bit of maple syrup. And then I made lentils rice casserole.
Yummy.
Who's going to his restaurant? But, I mean, that just, I have no idea about this, but what I was thinking was, like, maybe you start, so there's the vegetarian potluck we have going, and you start a cooking class on Saturday mornings.
I have a plug for the cattle industry. There's a dairy farm in Nova Scotia, and the farmer was a former fisherman. He is now raising kelp. And he's feeding the kelp to the cattle. It's cutting down their flatulence tremendously, and it's producing better milk. And he's has quite a following, and he's spreading it. So there's hope.
They are moving.
There's hope for the roast beef sandwich.
And you know, there are some farms where you actually drive by and you see cows in the field, and you think, well, that doesn't fit with the things I saw on Facebook. But that is like a 1/10% of the animals that are, it's very.
This is the large industrial. My sister's land is used.
That's the problem.
Yeah. That's one of the things that I brought up in here, because I wasn't big on Al Gore and on the CO2 part. And the whole thing was about the environment, and that is really, really good to get into doing the things that are good for the environment on specific areas. Like the wind worked really, really good in Scotland and Wales and all that. It might work, it wouldn't work here so well in Ontario, but it would work on the East Coast, and doing different things that way. And getting, and then we also touched on getting away from Arabian oil. There's nothing wrong with getting it out of Canada, out of the tar sands, because what they're doing at the end is they're making that land good for the First Nations to raise bison on. So they're taking something bad out of it, returning it good. So, and different ways of making energy that should be Canadian perspective, not necessarily everything that's highly subsidized, because in the end it's got to be economically feasible and helpful for all people, not just the people that can afford it.
For sure, for sure. Yes, it's got to benefit all of us. Yeah. The tweak I would make to what you're saying is, if we can not use the oil at all and just leave it in the ground, that's what we need to move towards. The reality is we're not there yet.
No.
So
even in our farming, because if they're cutting down rainforests to do monocrops, and that's oil-based. If every country is producing war armaments and selling them, that's all oil-based. So it's like. And
most of that rainforest is being cut down. Guess what it's going to feed?
Cattle range.
Cattle and monocrops.
Yeah. Years ago, I had someone say to me, I was a vegetarian already at the time, and they said, you know, they're cutting down the rainforest, and guess what they're growing? Soybeans to feed you vegans. And I was like, they are? And I went and researched it. It turns out they're feeding the soybeans to the cows, not to the vegans. But anyway. All right, 2 more comments. I saw a couple more hands. Yeah.
The United Church of Canada
is
doing their part in that they do not promote disposable, bottled water.
Right.
Correct.
Bottled water, because of the water use and because of the plastic bottles.
Yeah.
So we're not supposed to have, and we discourage anybody with a bottled water within this church.
Yep.
But that is the United Church of Canada's.
Yeah. They've also divested, is my understanding. So my understanding is the United Church a few years ago divested of anything that was related to dirty energy, as they call it. So they made some good decisions. Did you guys?
Well, we talked about, because of the video at the end, we talked about there were groups of people who decided that they weren't going, like when they went to fast food restaurants or something, they just said, I don't need a straw, no, I don't need a plastic lid.
A little louder.
Sorry. I don't need a straw, I don't need a plastic lid. And then those restaurants eventually started catching on, and they said, you know what, actually we're not going to just offer them unless people ask for them. And then what happened is the government of Ontario said, hey, how about we talk about this at the legislative level? Because it had that, social change happens because people change society, right? Like we all make that change. So it's just an example of what he was talking about here in Ontario, right?
Yeah.
And, how can we put our brains together to talk about what's the next thing that we do there? As a vegan, only for 6 years, but even in that 6 years, there's a lot more of us in the world, not just in Toronto or in Oshawa. And as we go out to eat, there's more and more places for us to eat. There's more and more people who are aware of how to have stuff on the menu for us that's not just salad. I went downtown last night or 2 nights ago and had a massive burger and ice cream and all, just really garbagey food, but really yummy. And it was all vegan. It was all already vegan. I didn't have to ask for anything special. So society moves, right? Yeah.
Slowly but surely. Yeah.
Would it be possible to see a show of hands of how many people are vegan or vegetarian
in the room?
In the room, yeah.
How many people are vegetarian?
Not pure, but try and be vegetarian.
Trying to be vegetarian.
Yeah.
How many are vegan? Anybody? How many are flexitarian, I think they call it.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're kind of like you're moving that direction, but you flex with where you are.
Cutting down a little.
So how many of you are meatitarian? Right, I mean this is a whole other topic we don't have time to get into, but it's an important one, but it is such a personal one, right? Like people's food, it's our culture, it's our family. I know when I went vegetarian, my mom could tell you stories, but she actually, and I didn't know about this till years after she told me that it had actually really made her sad the first Thanksgiving because she used to make soup, turkey soup, which I loved, right? And I wouldn't eat it anymore. But she never said a word to me at the time. But later she said there was a real sadness for her on that shift. I mean, that's, I don't know how many years ago now.
How about roast turkey? Did you turn that down too?
The roast turkey itself?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That would be worse.
That's very sad.
What I do, because I'm in nutrition, I do the 80-20 rule. So that means that I think that's...
That got a lot of attention. She said no to turkey. She said no to turkey. I think she said no to turkey. All right, final comments, and then we'll wrap it up.
I do the 80-20 rule. So I was trying to be a vegetarian for forever, for the last 4 years, right?
Right.